Now, here in part 2 of this series, we're going to be getting into a lot of really practical issues about discovering and fulfilling God's will for their lives. In part 1, we focused on a lot of the theological insights into God's will. And now in part 2, we're going to focus on application to that knowledge in real life. This isn't just going to be a bunch of abstract theology. I want to give you practical wisdom, real keys that you can put into practice in your life today. I may refer throughout our time together today, I may refer to my own experience and some of the things that I have tested and tried in my own life. And this isn't because I think I have it all figured out. Far from it. I'm very aware that all of us have a lot to learn. But I also realize that we learn a lot from each other. And so I hope that you'll understand today that my heart is not to brag or to talk down to you, but simply to encourage you with some of the lessons that God has taught me on my journey. And the theme of today's lesson is taking action. You know, one of the major things I want to do today is to contrast action with empty talk and good intentions. And I can't really emphasize enough how important this principle is. My friend, if you are going to fulfill God's will for your life, it's not going to happen sitting in an armchair dreaming about it. It's going to happen by getting up and getting going. And so if you're with us in part 1, I'm sure that by now you've realized I have a bit of a flair for the unpredictable. And so today I'm going to do something a bit unconventional. Since we're talking about taking action, rather than just staying in the safe, comfortable environment of the studio, I'm going to take action myself. I'm not just going to talk about getting up and going. I'm actually going to get up and go out into the real world myself so that I can illustrate these principles on the way. Sound like fun? Yeah. All right, here, let's get started. Now, I would love to take all of you with me as I leave the studio, but my car outside isn't big enough. So we have cameramen stationed all over the property, and you're going to see what happens on these screens right in front of you. Now, we're going to be on a bit of a journey today, and we're going to make a few important stops along the way. And at each stop, I believe you're going to get a new picture of what it means to take action. Now, one of the things I'm hoping that you take away from today's teaching, and you're going to see several examples of this along the way, is how incredibly important action is when it comes to discovering and fulfilling God's will for our lives. Now, I think it's important for me to mention at this point that when I talk about taking action, I'm not just talking about staying busy and doing lots of different things. I'm talking about a certain kind of action. It's what I call critical action that actually makes a difference and gets real results. I'll talk more about that a bit later. Now, some people don't like the idea of taking action because they think it demonstrates a lack of faith. But actually, the exact opposite is true. In the book of James, it says that faith without works is dead. Or said another way, faith without action is dead. One of my favorite passages, Daniel 11:32, says, "The people that know their God shall stand firm and take action." Anybody who knows God and understands His ways will know that our God expects us to be people of action. God can't bless our good intentions, only what we actually do. And one Bible story after another reiterates this principle. In the book of Matthew chapter 14, we read the story about how Peter walked on the water. It was early in the morning when Jesus came walking towards the disciples' boat on the turbulent sea. When the disciples saw him, they cried out in fear because they thought it was a ghost. But Jesus said, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." And then Peter responded. He called out and he said, "Lord, if it is you, then call me to come to you on the water." And Jesus replied with one word, "Come." I want you to notice something. Jesus didn't say, "Peter, come." He simply said, "Come." Do you realize what that means? Actually, any of the disciples that were in the boat could have responded to the Lord and walked on the water, but Peter was the only one. A lot of people criticize Peter for taking his eyes off of Jesus and eventually sinking. But you know, I admire him for being the only one who was willing to get out of the boat. You're never going to be able to walk on the water if you're not willing to step out of the boat and get your feet wet. You know, this secret is so simple, and yet it's so underemphasized in the Christian world. All of the waiting, wishing, and planning is actually just wasted time if you're not going to take action. If you want to learn how to swim, you're going to have to go ahead and take the plunge. Usually when I talk to people about taking action, their reaction is to come up with a list of reasons why they can't and a list of things that they can't do. Christians will often say things that sound very spiritual, like, I don't want to get ahead of God, or I'm waiting for God to open the right doors. And while it's true that certain doors may not be open for a variety of reasons, it's very unlikely that all the doors are shut at the same time. This is a good example of what I'm talking about. If you look ahead, you can see that the 3 lights in front of me are red right now. Now, what if the light directly in front of me turns green? But when I look ahead, I can see that the next 2 lights are still red. Should I just sit in front of the green light, waiting until all the lights turn green? Of course not. I should move through the green light that I have. Yet many people will not move through the green light that God has given them, because when they look ahead, they foresee obstacles that they don't know how they're going to deal with. In Joshua chapter 3, we read the story about how the children of Israel encountered the obstacle of the Jordan River, which was overflowing and impossible to cross. In obedience to the word of the Lord, Joshua commanded the priests to take the Ark of the Covenant and go forward into the waters of the Jordan River. Now, this surely would have seemed like a ridiculous idea, but look at what happened. And when those who carried the Ark came into the Jordan, and the feet of the priests carrying the Ark were dipped into the edge of the waters which were flowing down from above stood and rose up in one heap. So the people crossed opposite Jericho. Now, if Joshua would have been trained in one of our fine Bible colleges, he probably would have had more mature advice. He probably would have said something like this: guys, let's just wait here on the banks of the Jordan until the Lord opens a door for us. But if that had been his advice, they never would have gotten past the Jordan, because the water was not going to part for them until their feet got wet. My friends, sometimes you just have to go ahead and get your feet wet in faith and see what God will do for you.